Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar. It's in the bag, defining the right media mix for your upcoming sale. We are very excited to have you listening in. My name is Garth Harris, and I'm the Vice President of Operations here at Cake. And today I am joined by digital growth expert, Scott McLeod. I've asked Scott to join me for today's webinar for a few reasons. For starters, Scott has a very extensive history working with different sizes of companies, ranging from startup to direct-to-consumer brands, spending tens of millions of dollars on digital advertising. Also, I've been able to personally witness Scott explore all of the talking points in today's webinar through just being a client. Our hope is that we can bring some insight to how digital marketing is changing and what this means for the everyday digital marketer looking to mature their marketing mix for an upcoming sale or for their marketing strategy overall. So Scott, again, I'm very pleased that you're joining me today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Garth. It's much appreciated. As you kind of mentioned, I run growth for Nectar Sleep and Dream Cloud mattress brands. And for us, that means running the digital marketing and digital product and data teams. Previously, for the last 4 or 5 years prior to Nectar and Dream Cloud, I worked with a variety of startups and Fortune 500s, kind of helping them with performance marketing, conversion rate optimization, and generally, as it's known today, growth marketing. We used Cake in our early days at Nectar and Dream Cloud as an important piece of tracking our affiliate programs, and that kind of expanded to tracking all of our partner marketing and general marketing services. So happy to be here chatting with you guys today.
Awesome, thanks, Scott. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm the VP of Operations at Cake, and we offer a tracking and analytics platform for digital marketers looking to unify the unknown and known customer data across that multi-channel marketing mix. I'm in a unique position of helping clients onboard to Cake with very specific tracking or attribution or reporting challenges and getting to watch their marketing and analytics teams mature through the tools we provide. So before we get started, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. First, don't worry if you're joining late or you have to leave early. The webinar is being recorded and we will send you the slides later today. And if you'd like to get into contact with either myself or Scott after the webinar, our information is listed on this slide. So don't be shy, connect, email, message us, etc. Scott, anything you want to add before we dive in?
Not a lot, Garth, other than I'm excited to chat about this topic. I've kind of seen MTA affect our business, and it's something I kind of nerd out on. So it's great to be here and chat with you guys.
Awesome. Let's get started. So I want to set the stage with a clear challenge that I see, and I think, Scott, I believe you agree. It's the challenge that online retailers face, and it's understanding what marketing strategies and ad spend are most effective. In other words, what's working and what isn't working. And you wouldn't be alone in this challenge. More than $200 billion is spent globally on digital advertising, yet only 35% of marketers continue to have trouble defining the customer journey. And we'll expand on the customer journey piece in a bit, but it's not all doom and gloom. As studies show, 42% of digital marketers are increasing their research to gain a deeper understanding of the customer journey and the touch points. But when it comes time for online retailers to understand the unique combination of touch points that drive marketing investments, many are still flying blind. Without the insight into the customer journey, online retailers will struggle to define the media mix that is most likely to result in sales and return on ad spend. I mean, after all, that's what it's all about. So Scott, I'm sure you've seen this time and time again. How can online retailers overcome this challenge of understanding what marketing strategies and ad spend are most effective?
That's a good question, Garth, and I share the sentiment, and you're totally right that the problem is pretty serious and it's super expensive. I think most marketers grapple with this when they're forced to report on marketing strategies and things that affect the overall performance of the sales and ongoing marketing programs. But it's definitely something most online retailers and all online marketers really struggle with. I think the solution is some form of multi-touch attribution, tracking the customer journey from first touch to last touch and kind of everything in between. By understanding the full journey, I think you're able to actually determine the right media mix for your business at the right time.
Yeah, and easier said than done, right? I mean, of course, this leads to a few follow-up questions around how we go about determining the right marketing mix. And as we talk, Scott, I'm really looking forward to hearing how you've done this in the past and how our listeners can apply some of these best practices themselves. So what would you say are some general best practices for determining the right mix? How do you go about doing this?
It's a good question, Garth. And I think at the end of the day, determining the right media mix comes from how your team approaches attribution. And I think this all focuses on how do we connect the anonymous visitors and customers to the known. And there's a few ways that I kind of recommend businesses and teams kind of start here. And first is just being able to connect the anonymous to known. The second would be setting some form of standard to understand your visitor's journey. This can be a visitor ID, using cookies, or using an automated attribution solution like Cake, kind of helps stitch this stuff together. So you need a standard way to track. Another best practice is setting a standard in view and click windows. So if you're looking at marketing services and analytics tools today, they generally all look back windows for a conversion event. And if you're going to look at stitching all these marketing services together, it's really important to make sure you're not comparing apples to oranges, so to speak. So making sure that your view and click windows are the same across the same type of marketing channels. And generally, you can have prospecting channels match the same click and view windows, or retargeting channels or affiliates. But the important piece here is to set a standard. Next kind of piece to this is standardizing the marketing events that get tracked themselves. So first is understanding the look back windows for your events and standardizing them. But the next kind of important piece is making sure you're tracking the right events across everywhere. And this allows you to connect and unify the anonymous and known journeys by making sure you have these standards. It kind of makes it a lot easier as you approach removing any data silos. You need to make sure that there's a common way to connect these things. And again, using Cake is an easy way to do so. You can use BI tools and more advanced data solutions. But at the end of the day, you really want to help stitch this stuff together to be able to tap into multi-touch attribution.
Yeah, that's good. Let's explore one of the first items you brought up about connecting the anonymous and the known customer journey. I think before we do, though, I think we need to define the anonymous customer journey, since I've heard the phrase, quote unquote, customer journey mentioned a lot, and I think it can be a little confusing. So we define the anonymous customer journey as the first interaction when a consumer engages with your brand before he or she identifies themselves to the brand through either like a sign up or a purchase, a newsletter, etc. And I think it's important to also point out the distinction between the anonymous journey and then the more traditional term customer journey, which tends to refer to the interactions your customers have once they get to your page. We believe understanding the anonymous journey is just so vital. So as we mentioned earlier, 35% of marketers continue to have trouble defining what that customer journey is, or that anonymous customer journey. Another way of saying this is that customers struggle to attribute a sale or any other meaningful action really to the right traffic sources. From my experience, this is due to marketers using the old model of last touch and thinking that the customer journey begins only once someone identifies themselves. This problem can be further complicated, I think, if you're tracking your various channels and sources in different platforms. I believe we'll touch on that later when we talk about data silos. But from my personal experience, though, we get a lot of calls at Cake from prospects looking to move beyond last touch, and they're eager to discover what other models are out there and how that could help their efforts. Scott, why has the last touch model, like the old model, why has it been used for so long? And do you think there's any value?
It's a good question, Garth. I think, frankly, the old model was used because it was the only thing that technology and service providers were able to operate on. So I think technology is an important piece as to why last touch was the main focus. I think the additional piece is the media agencies and media world, kind of driven by broadcast and offline media, we're most used to attributing based on customer surveys or some form of last touch attribution that was a little bit qualitative. So I think when you talk about old school marketing with agencies and lack of technology, people were kind of forced to just using last touch. I think there's more value in understanding last touch than nothing. And 10, 20 years ago, I think there was even less of an understanding of what your last touch attribution was. So it was a good step in the right direction, and there is some value, but as technologies and services like Cake and modern analytics have evolved, there's more ways to approach first, middle, and last touch attribution.
Yeah, I mean, you make a great point, Scott. I mean, people are engaging with advertising well before the last touch. In fact, 88% of consumers engage online in the pre-purchase research stage, which makes it no longer sufficient to start the quote unquote getting to know you process once a customer has made themselves known. I mean, if you're only focusing on the known journey, you're leaving so much valuable acquisition opportunities on the table.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And I think the visual here really helps tie that together. Of before you could only have last touch. And I think as you move into new attribution models, understanding all of the previous touch points ends up being so important. And I think first, middle, and last end up being the whole picture here. And middle being an interesting one where there's generally many touch points.
Yeah. So I think, so the old model, right, it's last touch. It's essentially giving full credit to the very last touch point along the customer journey once the individual has made themselves known. As we look to the new model, though, I mean, we see that we're bringing in valuable touch points across lots of different stages in the marketing mix. Awareness campaigns are bringing users to the first touch. Retargeting allows us to gain visibility to the interactions soon after. And eventually, the individual converts, and we gain that full view across the customer journey. We're actually going to reference this slide later in the webinar when we dive a bit deeper into multi-touch attribution and how that helps expand upon the value of tracking each touch point. Anything else you want to add to that, Scott?
Yeah, I think as you look at tracking multi-touch attribution, there ends up being different models of how you look at this data. And I think first, middle, and last is a valuable way to break it apart. But I think as you use data-driven attribution models or weighted models, you can kind of build something that fits your business and your buyer's journey particularly. But the first step there is really getting to a place where you have a multi-touch attribution solution.
Yeah. So once marketers really make that shift from the old to the new, I mean, what can you expect to gain insight to? I mean, how does this help online retailers?
It's a good question, Garth. There's a lot of different things you can kind of gain insight to. And I think at the highest level, it's simply moving past tracking first and last and looking at everything in the middle. And I keep referencing the middle touch as that's generally the area that people have the least understanding to. And I think I spoke to data-driven attribution models, and understanding the true value to these middle touch points is super helpful. And this insight of, hey, what were my middle touch points? What was my introduction point for the consumer? These things really help online retailers understand the full customer journey outside of their own website. And I think at the end of the day, using click trackers, impression trackers, and on-page tracking, you're able to kind of stitch all these touch points together.
Yeah, and I think those touch points, which at the end of the day are impressions, they're clicks, all that data lives somewhere, right? I mean, and those are truly the building blocks for understanding the customer journey in the first place. And you make a great point, Scott. I mean, you need a platform to standardize the tracking in a meaningful way, bringing all that data together. Because if you're not, your data is living in these data silos, which brings us really to our next point of implementing a modern approach to measurement. And so many online retailers and marketers alike struggle with this due to the data silos that we've been talking about. So moving on, capturing that holistic view of digital marketing spend across the customer journeys has been technically and culturally problematic. I mean, most marketing organizations have historically operated in these silos, from search, social, affiliate teams. I mean, they've all been looked at separately. You may have insight into individual channels like paid search and social, which I think Google and Facebook do a good job of, but chances are you're driving blind when you try to understand how all the digital campaigns work together across the entire journey. Scott, what can online retailers and marketers alike do to help break down these silos?
Yeah, it's a good question, Garth. And I think it's kind of important for the marketers to all share a sentiment that things are moving to more of an omni-channel approach, and an understanding that no buying decision or sign-up event is singular, and really understanding that people are coming from many places. And because of this constant increase in more marketing channels, we're finding this data is siloed. And I think, again, we keep going back to standardization, but an important piece of this was that you no longer look at a single channel by last touch, and really looking at attribution and the customer journey as a whole. And using a tool or service like Cake really helps stitch together this data. And again, we talked through standardizations, but at the end of the day, you can create all the standards in the world. You really need to bring all that stuff together. And that's, again, where something like Cake can really help. And this is where breaking down the silos is really more about making sure the marketer has all the information for all the touch points across the buyer's journey. And whether that's for a sale or any ongoing campaigns, I think removing the silos here, again, really focus on standardization and the technology choice you have to bring data across all these different marketing channels.
No, you're absolutely right, Scott. I mean, the siloed approach just isn't viable anymore. especially when you're up against the ever-rising customer acquisition costs. I mean, you need better insights that connects individual customer journeys across all the channels.
Man, I think that's important differentiation, right? It's like, even if you have everything connected and using standard events and same look back windows and everything here perfect in terms of an attribution solution, you still need to be able to translate what that means for your team. And I think in my experience, the way to leverage centralized data is really making sure your team has shared KPIs. We have shared understandings of reporting. When someone's managing SEM or AdWords and Facebook, when they're looking to understand the performance over the last week or the performance for a previous sale, using this to understand what's coming next, they really need to make sure that's a part of their process. So I think making sure you're using an attribution solution is important, but really making sure the team is leveraging this, right? And that's where having centralized data is so important, but making sure your team is actually leveraging the centralized data. And the way I've done that in the past is make sure people share KPIs, they're aware of reporting, and everyone's on the same page for what they're doing with the attribution data.
Yeah, and Scott, you've been doing this for a while now. Do you have any personal examples of how you've operated in data silos and how technology hopefully helped you out with this?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have a lot of examples of when either me or a client or business I was working with was operating in data silos. And I really think the most common are people looking at Facebook ads or AdWords or any specific marketing channel all by itself and using the data that the marketing partner gives you as truth. But at the end of the day, that kind of, operating in silo doesn't really help tell you the whole picture. And using something to give me my own cross-reference. And I think the common thing here is, hey, for any conversion event you have, you should really try and have up to 3 or 4 cross-referencing points of attribution. And what that kind of means is if Facebook takes credit for 100 sales and AdWords takes credit for 100 sales and Pinterest takes credit for 100 sales, but there was only 100 or 200 sales for the day, where did that go to, right? And I think people generally are operating their channels in silo. And I think it goes back to the previous discussion we were having here on the previous slide of how do we build attribution into the process for your team? And frankly, the technology helps bring it all together. But operating in data silos is all too common these days, particularly for campaign managers. It's also kind of important to implement the single solution, mostly again, so when the team's looking to plan a campaign or optimize their spend and obviously try and find marketing efficiencies, the team's able to constantly kind of come back to this technology solution in one place. And I think this is an important piece is if you're a channel marketing manager or you're managing channel managers, you're usually having to hop across a bunch of different marketing dashboards. And I think, again, the benefit to this unified marketing solution, AKA your multi-touch attribution solution, really helps make sure that everything's unified.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you need like a common language between your teams, right? I mean, when everybody's logging into different platforms, they're not even looking at the same data and not even looking at the same reports. So
exactly.
No, I got it. So Scott, we've talked a lot about the anonymous journey. We've explored kind of that old way of last touch versus the new way of doing things, which is having eyes on every touch point along the customer journey. Why don't we wrap this up by discussing why multi-touch attribution is so important to understanding your marketing mix? So when I say that, so what exactly is multi-touch attribution, or as we commonly say sometimes, MTA? We define it as the process of evaluating each interaction or touch point a consumer experiences on the journey to a conversion. This insight is then used to determine which campaign touch points were the most impactful in driving a consumer to complete the online retail desired action, which is typically a sale. So MTA, Scott, so what? What's the big difference between moving from a single attribution to more of that multi-touch attribution? I mean, what do marketers have to gain by moving to this method? And what are the key differences?
That's a good question, Garth. And I mean, the biggest difference between single and multi-touch attribution is that middle touch. And I keep coming back to that because the biggest value or misunderstanding piece of the customer journey is everything that influenced before the last touch. So the introducer and the closer, let's say first and last touch, are super important, but really understanding the value to the middle touch, because often those are the customer engagements and pieces in the journey that get lost. Current models and technologies don't really support everything in the middle. I think it's seen time and time again, there'll be an affiliate or a special content partner or website that ends up being really impactful for your middle touch. And I think understanding what that middle touch is really helps you, again, either double down on the things that are working and or focus on finding more of those opportunities. And I think the granularity you kind of get from this ends up being that piece, right? So knowing middle touch is a little bit more than, great, Facebook was in the middle. It's which ad on Facebook, which campaign targeting. These 4 or 5 touch points that end up being lost in the middle on most marketing mixes end up being some of the most valuable points in the customer's journey, and which help them make a decision to purchase or sign up. Is kind of the golden goose here of multi-touch attribution, is really understanding the value to middle. And again, first and last are super important, but middle is usually what's lost in most people's customer journey.
Yeah, I remember when Nectar came on board to Cake, you guys had like a really clear perception of the value of certain channels, specifically the affiliate channel. And when you guys were able to kind of connect all of those customer touch points through our tracking and that, through the multi-touch attribution, the reports came to life and you guys were gaining brand new insights into the value of your channels that you just didn't have eyes on before. So that's kind of the fun piece of MTA, is just allowing clients to kind of gain that first step of understanding the data and being able to visualize it in a meaningful way that says, wow, like that channel actually has much more influence on my bottom line than I was giving it credit for previously.
Yeah, I think that's fair, or less, right? And that was kind of a surprise. You go, hey, well, we thought this was much more important than it was. And I remember the first times we had all the channels tracked on Cake, after a couple of weeks, the insights really started to roll in. And sometimes they were very counter to what A, our other data sources were saying, or B, our assumptions and hypothesis were.
Yeah, no, exactly. So how can we boil down the value of MTA? I think it's really having a deep, accurate view into the customer journey, the ability to optimize future campaigns through the looking back component of this, right? And then the ability to better allocate digital spend with real-time insights. So Scott, why don't you just show us maybe a quick example of some of the reports you've used in the past that's really helped you determine the right marketing mix?
Yeah, it's a great one, Garth. And I think as we moved into using Cake, we just started tracking all of our channels for effectiveness. And I think it's important to, as you look at everything being tracked and you allow a statistically significant number of customers to go through the journey, we can use that data for planning major sales, promotions, any upcoming activities or budget changes. And I think this is all the way down to what email, ad, or affiliate, really understanding the value provided. And I think this slide particularly shows that. This is a very specific period of time we were looking at to understand what revenue was generated by which channel. And again, this was to help us figure out where we'd want to allocate our energy and time for the next major sale. And I think when MTA works best is really as the cross-reference to all these marketing channels. Organic search or affiliate or social or display or email or paid search, these channels all kind of wanted to take more credit than was worth to each one. And by having this top-down view in reporting, it really makes it easier, again, for the team who are managing these channels to understand what is the value between first, middle, or last touch for each channel. And frankly, each channel kind of ends up having a different role as we unveil this kind of insight. So these reports really start to show, hey, which channels are best for first, middle, or last touch. And not even channel, but what creative, ad targeting, and different sort of sub-variables affect the customer journey the most.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and I think having those, initial insights with that ability to then drill down to campaigns and ads, which is really where the meat is, right? I mean, you have to have full clarity into the whole customer journey.
100%.
Which really lets you kind of get to understanding that marketing mix, right?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely it. And we're talking retroactively is for reporting. But when we want to talk about, let's look forward, I think that's when we talk about the marketing mix in particular. So how do we use all this retroactive data from previous sales or previous campaigns to help us plan for the future? And I think this is where multi-touch attribution really starts to pay for itself in a lot of ways. It's just too risky to allocate money or into any channel or campaign without for sure knowing how it affects the customer's journey. I think, again, that's where with multi-touch and an attribution solution, you can feel much more confident with the ideal marketing mix and never find yourself weighted too heavy on any one channel. And I think that's a general challenge for our marketing team is how do we make sure that we're A, decreasing the cost to acquisition, and B, increasing the volume of customers we acquire. And I think C is constantly diversifying where you're finding customers. I think particularly in digital marketing, you can't really control these channels. What if Twitter changes the algorithm, or Facebook's newsfeed changes, or what happens if Instagram ships shopping? These kind of things can really end up affecting your business. And by understanding a diverse marketing mix, by using retroactive MTA data, I think you can feel more confident about like marketing changes in the ecosystem, as well as where your single business or team is headed.
Yeah, and Scott, would you say it's fair to say that it's really not possible to even get to these level of insights where you can be able to develop this marketing mix without being able to standardize your tracking, remove the silos, and then start to have, you know, insights into the full customer journey through MTA?
It's literally impossible. I think anyone who thinks they're doing that is kind of fooling themselves. That if you're taking the data that any one vendor gives you as truth, you're not really doing the job of understanding your customer journey. I think you said it best there. It is the most valuable thing here, and you can't really operate by creating an ideal healthy marketing mix off assumptions. You can't assume how channels are performing. You really need to know how they're performing. And anybody who draws up their marketing budget without attribution, I think, is really doing themselves harm in terms of operating and optimizing towards something successful.
Yeah, that's good. Hey, man, for the sake of time, I think we're going to recap what we've done here. I think we could have chatted, you know, for quite a while longer, but yeah, let's just review what we've covered here. So really, to recap, right? So we've brought up this idea of connecting the anonymous and known customer journey. The customer journey has historically been defined as the interactions that users are taking once they get to your website. And I think today what we've highlighted is that users are engaging so much earlier into that marketing process than we give it credit for. So getting eyes on the anonymous customer journey is just so important. And then once you actually start tracking the customer across that anonymous journey, it's important to realize that you can't really successfully track and analyze that data if it's in data silos. So step number 2 is really removing those data silos, realizing that you can't do reporting through individual platforms. You should be kind of reporting that all in one single marketing hub, if you will. And really the next thing is tap into the power of multi-touch attribution. Last touch was the prevailing model for a really long time. Historically speaking, that last touch point is the thing that closed the sale, but we want to make sure that we understand which touch points along the customer journey are influencing our customers. And once you do all these things, you know, use those results to develop a good marketing mix, diversify your marketing mix, have a good understanding of where your spend is going across the full digital marketing mix ecosystem, so you have a good understanding of what's working and what's not working. Would that be a fair way to recap what we just talked about, Scott?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I mean, I think at the end of the day, if you're not using an attribution solution in this day and age, I think you're really doing yourself a disservice. But I think one more level is if you're using an attribution solution that doesn't support multi-touch, you're really not understanding what's affecting your customer, how to attribute marketing spend, how to attribute the success and conversion of specific channels. And I think in this day and age, as digital becomes more and more of a priority in marketing, really understanding all the different digital touch points helps make the best decisions for our marketing team. Just couldn't stress enough that an attribution solution ends up really helping you make better marketing decisions.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. So, hey, connect with us. Again, this is Garth Harris. You can get me at garth@getcake.com. Feel free to connect with Scott. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know if you have any questions or if you just want to chat more about anything that we've talked about today. And lastly, feel free to reach out if you guys have any questions about Cake. By all means, go to getcake.com to learn more about our product. And we'll also be having a recording of this webinar hosted on our website as well. So thank you guys so much for listening with us today. Scott, thank you so much for helping me talk through this important subject matter. Really appreciate your expertise.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Garth. I appreciate it.
No worries. All right, guys, thank you so much.